Hello, everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Robert Bartlett, a very well-known, I should say, practical alchemist. Not just an alchemist; he's a practical alchemist. He's actually really doing the work, which is super good. And he's also an author, written two very influential books in the field of Western alchemy. So I think I'm right in saying so. The first book was Real Alchemy, and your second book was Way of the Crucible, wasn't it? Have I got that in the right order?
Yes,
Yes.
and I've
Good.
also written two other books, The Temper of Herbs and the book on antimony.
I was really looking forward to this because I know very little about the Western tradition. So for me, this is really exciting to hear sort of the counter side of what I've been doing. So it'd be interesting to sort of go through this discussion and see if there are points of interest and things that we can kind of bounce ideas off one another. But I'll just give a little bit of background. I was before I introduced Robert. So we've kind of been corresponding over the years. When I was writing my books, I was emailing Robert a little bit, and he was helping me out. So I've always wanted to get the chance to speak to him, and now seemed a good chance, and we kind of collided and connected. So hopefully today will be a really interesting dialogue. So do you want to, or would you like to go ahead and sort of explain to people what you do, Robert, and what your background is and how you got interested in alchemy?
Yes, first, thanks for inviting me to this. It's true we have kind of missed each other through time, several occasions, but it comes up frequently in classes that we teach here that when people ask me how did I get involved with alchemy, and it started for me when I was a kid. I had a rock collection, and I must have been, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, had a nice rock collection, and learned that there were ways to treat the rocks to figure out what they are. And one of the methods that interested me was a blowpipe analysis, where you use a small blowpipe and direct a flame from a candle or an alcohol lamp onto a sample that's mixed with salts like potassium carbonate or borax, and you obtain a colored bead that gives you an indication what type of elements are present in the mineral, and you can make guesses based on that. And as a kid, this was all great fun to me. I got into that, and I went to the library looking for additional information about analyzing minerals, and I ran into this section on alchemy, and I kind of thumbed through a few albums, and they're talking about metals and minerals that I recognize, but now they're injecting planets and astrology, and this all intrigued me, and the artwork, fascinated me. So I checked a few books out and started pouring through them, and didn't have a clue what they were talking about, but it still fascinated me, the whole concept of astrology. And here the planets are now mixed in with the metals and minerals, and I was trying to understand it. It really caught my attention.
Mm.
So I think one of the earliest experiments I tried, it was hard to find any practical information about alchemy. It was very cryptic, and very subtle hints about how to do it. One text I found was John Maxon Stillman's book on the history of alchemy and early chemistry. And it had a recipe in there for an emerald, artificial emerald, which I tried out. I had all the ingredients I needed except the urine of an ass. And it wasn't likely I was going to come upon any, so I used the next closest thing, which turned out okay later on, since I could blame its failure on not being enough of an ass.
I didn't like to ask, but
So I started to study astrology and Kabbalah, magic, witchcraft, herbology, trying to understand the language of alchemy. Got involved with Israel Regardie's works on the Golden Dawn magical system, got very involved with that. And an article that Israel Regardie published in the Llewellyn New Times, he mentions he's introducing the Alchemist Handbook by Frater Albertus, and like, here's the guy I was looking for, talking about practical laboratory alchemy and how to do it. So he provided a name and address. So I applied for information, and I got a copy of the Alchemist Handbook and an application for classes at the Paracelsus Research Society in Salt Lake City. So they're only accepting 12 people at a time. So I was very excited to get my letter of acceptance. And I took my first class there in 1974. And the classes were 2 weeks long. They ran from 9 in the morning till 5 in the evening. And then there was laboratory work, pretty much constant throughout the whole 2 weeks. And this was all except Sunday. So Monday through Saturday, we would have these classes, very intense, and you were on site. Everyone lived there in dormitories. There were no TVs, no radios, no newspapers. You were pretty much cloistered there with, 12 like-minded souls studying, very immersed in alchemy. And that was the first class, and followed by 6 more. So 7 years, 2 weeks each year, doing this very intensive training in alchemy. And it was the second year into it, Frater Albertus mentioned the reopening of Paracelsus Laboratories. That was to be a commercial offshoot of the teachings. So the laboratory would actually put the teachings into practice, make materials. There's a whole catalog of their products that they put out, mineral and plant extractives based on alchemical principles. And I was very interested in working with that, and told Frater Albertus that, one-on-one time we had together. And he recommended that I return to school and finish my degree in chemistry, which I had started 2 years into and dropped out to attend the PRS school. He told me that my work would be waiting for me if I finished my degree. So I did that, pursued my degree in chemistry in Boise, Idaho University. And on graduation, I moved down to Salt Lake City and became the chief chemist at Paracelsus Laboratories. So working very intensely with Frater Albertus and the medical consultant, Dr. David Shine, we developed a whole series of metallic and mineral medicines. So we have tinctures from antimony and gold and all of the various minerals, mineral salts. So we developed these whole lines. In 1984, Frater Albertus died, and the school closed right away. There was no provision for anyone to take over the teachings. The laboratory, it kind of limped on for a while. It was a little ahead of its time. The whole herbal revolution hadn't really kicked in yet, and herbal medicines were still the realm of the hippies, So Paralab never did really well, and they finally went under. I kept myself employed as a chemist at the bench level so that I would have access to analytical instrumentation. There was a time when Frater Albertus would be off teaching in Europe or Australia. And when he returned, he would always want an update, what was going on at Paralab, what progress we had made. And one time I had made this flow chart of the whole antimony process that we were developing. And I had samples of all the starting materials and all the intermediate materials and all the way to the final product. And although we didn't have any analytical equipment there at Paralab, I did some analysis using thin layer and paper chromatography and some fractional distillation and various chemical tests. And I had all this analytical data to show Rada Albertus, and he got very excited, and he looked right at me. He said, "Keep doing this, keep finding out this information, collect as much of this analytical information as you can on the materials, because it doesn't exist anywhere." And so that kind of became my calling, and all my future work was largely centered around that. So I kept myself employed as a chemist over the next 40 years. And each time, I had several jobs in various chemical situations. And so I had access to various pieces of analytical equipment through time. And I availed myself of using those pieces of equipment to analyze alchemical products that I had prepared. And so I've collected a mountain of analytical data that I'm now getting together and publishing that, making it available for other workers, kind of as a baseline and something to start out with, at least. So I'm working with that. I've recently published the book on antimony, which details a lot of my work on antimony. It'll be followed by another volume on the same, but I have another 3-volume work on mineral alchemy that I'm working with now. So a lot of writing still coming in the future here. I want to make all this information available. So it's become my guide through time is collecting all this information, and it does no good sitting on my bookshelf. So I want to make it available on a wider arena so that everyone can benefit from that and use it as at least some guidance. There was in 2002, I think it was, my wife was taking a class in hypnotherapy, getting a license. And she mentioned my interest in alchemy, and everyone was intrigued. They had heard of alchemy, but nobody knew anything about it. And so they asked if I could give a 2 or 3 hour presentation to the class about alchemy. And I said, yeah, I guess I could do that. I wasn't a teacher, but it turned into a 5-hour class. and everyone was so intrigued, they wanted more. So by the time I got home, they were requesting 6-hour long class sessions, if I could arrange that.
You must have made a good impression.
Everyone was very excited. So it blossomed from there. We started teaching classes. Everyone was very delighted with the information. And it's just become, for the past 21 years now, we've been teaching a series of classes in practical laboratory alchemy, starting with Prima class, which lays out the history and ideas about alchemy and delves into the herbal realm. So how to apply alchemical principles to develop advanced, very powerful herbal medicines using alchemical principles. And then there's a Secunda class, which is sort of the intermediate realm of universals, rainwater, snow, using that as a alchemical material to develop products. But also we look at the animal realm, products from the animal realm, things like the oil of egg, ghee, but also mineral preparations, feathers, bones, things that have been somewhat processed by animals already. And it's sort of a springboard into the actual mineral and metallic world of alchemy, which some say is the true realm of alchemy. So tertia class or third class deals with mineral and metallic alchemy, especially, and also delves into the work on antimony, which was one of Frauder Albertus's pet projects, but also all through time, antimony has been a very powerful player in Western alchemy. And thus the book on antimony that I recently wrote.
I was going to ask you about that. Why do you think that, or what conclusions? You've obviously read a lot about this and you've experimented with it, but why is it such an important mineral, do you think, in the Western tradition? Because I'm just thinking in terms of Rasa, we have, let's say, angina as the same material, but it's virtually not mentioned, and if it is, it's kind of an aside. It's not something that's really focused on. So why is that so popular in the Western tradition?
Actually, it's interesting. You mentioned Rasa and Mercury being the centerpiece in Indian alchemy, and antimony plays that role largely in a lot of the Western techniques. They see it as the fixed mercury, whereas the quicksilver is the volatile mercury. So there are actually two mercuries,
Right?
and both of them lead to paths which can make the philosopher's stone, which has reputedly the ability to transmute metals, but also to prepare the elixir of life. And a universal panacea cures all diseases. Antimony is said to be the Aries of the philosophers, and the sun is exalted in Aries. And so it has that property of purifying gold to its utmost degree. In fact, it was a very common way of purifying gold was to fuse it with antimony. And the antimony would eat up all the other metals. They called it the wolf because it would eat all the metals and leave the gold purified. And so it has that property of acting on us as well. So it purifies our body just like it purifies gold and brings it to a spiritual state.
Right.
Is the idea. Most of my work has been around medicinal qualities. I haven't delved too much into the transmutation properties, but except a few experiments like I wonder what if, I add this and that and what happens. But most of my work is centered around medicinal benefits from a lot of these materials. So that got me into the parallels with Ayurveda and Rasa Shastra. And I can see very clearly the connections through time of the two, East and West. They share so many of the same ideas.
When we're sort of working Ayurvedically with it, we're always kind of thinking in terms of dosha and tastes and things like that. But of course, we've got the Ayurvedic model to fall back on. But from a Western tradition, what are you falling back on as your diagnosis system? Would you be working more with the sort of Greco-Arabic Unani sort of style, the four element system, or is there a kind of corpus of work that allows you to sort of draw on that medicinally?
In the classical period of alchemy, Western alchemy, from the time of the ancient Egyptians all the way up through to the time of Boyle and Newton, they relied on the humoral medicine model, which is very much like Tridosha. They have the same 4-element system, or 5 elements rather. And the doshas, we have the Vata, Pitta, Kapha in the Ayurvedic system, and stemming from Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. And they have their mirrors in the alchemical 3 principles of salt, sulfur, and mercury of the alchemist. And the descriptions of the two, East and West, are almost identical, and they overlay so nicely. And so I have a couple of diagrams I use in in classes, I show that, in the Western tradition, we begin with this, what they call the chaos or the prima materia. And the first law in Western alchemy is that, all of this is one thing. All of this comes out of one ultimate source. And the second law is that of polarity. So the one divides into two. We can't comprehend unity, but once we get into this binary state, we can start to make comparisons of things. So the first law of understanding this, it gets into the law of polarity. And so the one, the chaos, divides into an active and a passive state. And we could think of it as energy and matter in today's terms. So energy and matter are equivalent. And then even within those two poles, they separate out and they have the law of polarity. So we have the active separates out into the two active elements of fire and air. And then the passive, what they call the salt element, turns into the two passive elements of water and earth. And many alchemists say that only God and nature can work at that level of manipulating these elements. But fortunate for us, they tend to come together in a way that they become accessible to us. So the idea is that the fire acts upon the air element and creates sulfur, the alchemical sulfur. And the air acts upon the water and creates the alchemical mercury. And then the water acts upon earth and creates the alchemical salt. Salt, sulfur, and mercury are the classic alchemical terms. In other words, they relate to the ideas or concepts of body, soul, and spirit. And in the alchemical process, which they call spagyrics, and this was a term that Paracelsus developed from two Greek words, speo and agiron, meaning to separate and to recombine. The spagyric process has three steps: separation, where you separate the three essentials, body, soul, and spirit, or the salt, sulfur, mercury. And then you purify each of those separately, and then recombine those, cohobate them. So they're separated, purified, put back together, and resurrected, in a sense, now on a higher spiritual level. So they've passed through death and purification and resurrection, and become refined, living medicines. In the Eastern methods, in Ayurveda, I use kind of the same diagram just to keep it, comprehensible, I guess. So in the Eastern diagram, we have the three essentials designated as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Rajas being the active, and then tamas being the passive, sattva being the balance of the two. And then even these can be considered to have their polar qualities. So the rajas incorporates the two active elements, so fire and water. Water in the Western tradition is summed up under one of the passives, but in Ayurveda or in Rasa Shastra, it's fire and water. And water is the more active of the two passive elements. So it's considered one of the actives. So the rajas incorporates the water and fire elements. The earthy element, then tamas, that incorporates the water and earth elements. And then the fifth element comes directly from sattva. That's the fifth element, the quintessence. And then these again come together to generate the what Western alchemists called the three essentials, salt, sulfur, and mercury, which directly relate to the three doshas of vata, pitta, and kapha. And then associated with each of those are a series of tastes, which are very important in the practical manipulation of materials later on. In the Western or in the Eastern tradition, they treat materials in situ. So in the West, things were considered to have certain diseases. That's why metals corrode, because they have a type of leprosy. And you separate their essentials and you purify them, put them together, and it cures them. In the Western or the Eastern tradition, rather, they recognize the same thing. Materials have certain defects, and we cure those through the application of certain medicines. So they have a whole list of different medical drugs. They have sweet drugs, sour drugs, different urines and milks and lactose, latexes from plants. So they have this whole list of various drugs that you would apply to basically cure the defects in different materials and get rid of their toxic natures. And that's really the biggest difference in Eastern and Western. The ideas are the same. We're curing their defects so that they are purified and become more spiritual, more powerful and penetrating.
Yeah, having seen your diagrams, I'm just looking at your diagrams while we're talking, and I'll put these up on the screen as well while you're talking. Yeah, you can see it really clearly. It really sort of lays it out quite nicely. So I guess you can kind of easily move or transmute between the two systems and kind of not feel too, not too lost. I mean, but you can sort of, you've taken the Western tradition and kind of imposed it or superimposed it onto the Eastern tradition, and it's still viable for you. You can work.
Yeah. Yeah, even though technically, all the elements drive out of tamas in the Eastern tradition, but I use the same diagram to make it more referable to East and West. The ideas are the same, and part of the curriculum at the PRS incorporated Tridosha. In fact, I got my first book on Tridosha from Frater Albertus. By Bhattacharya. It's an old one. It's good.
I'll see if I can find a copy.
But that was my first introduction to into that whole area. So we did cover that in the curriculum at the PRS.
That's pretty early though, isn't it? That's quite. I mean, Ayurveda really didn't. For me, I didn't really see it take much of a foothold until about probably around the early 90s. People like David Frawley and Dr. Robert Svoboda and Atreya Smith. I mean, they were kind of getting popular around that time. And then by the end of the 90s, they were sort of fairly well established as, Ayurvedic people in the West, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. We would talk about plants and their doshas. We call them their VPK factors. So whether you would excite or suppress vata or pitta kapha, they had different ratings as far as their BPK factors. We're talking the same stuff. Just as soon as you got the lingo down, the translation of the words, it was you're talking the same thing. And I could see definitely there was interaction between the East and West very early on. There are documents showing the presence of Indian doctors in ancient Alexandria. So there was a whole congregation of Indian alchemists visited Alexandria around, it was about 200 BC. So very early on, they had that connection, and they took some stuff back with them. And also, Alexander moved into India. He brought Greek medicine, which turned into Unani. Unani was kind of a corruption of Aeonic. medicine to Greek medicine. So it kind of collided with the local medicine and became the Tridosha or the Ayurvedic system. Although um, the source of the Vedic medicine more from Atharva Veda.
It's another book on sort of, it's like a book on commerce, a very ancient Indian book on commerce about where to find gemstones, where to find metals, how to mine them, how to best extract them. It's like a manual for sort of making money, but like Atara is like wealth. So it's like a manual on how to get wealth. But even that's
Yeah,
got a lot of uses in there. They'll talk about using sulfur medicinally and, various types of pyrite are mentioned in there. It's quite an amazing book. It even mentions how to to some extent make artificial gemstones as well, which is quite interesting.
yeah. And as I understand, some people considered those black arts because they were about you, yourself, and your own self-aggrandizement. Whereas the other Vedic texts were all about how to worship the gods and goddesses and make them happy and proper ceremony and all that. These texts were all about how to help yourself. So some of them considered it black arts, similar to alchemy, were considered black arts. So, in fact, the word alchemy, some believe, derived from the word chem or chemi, which was an old term for Egypt, which meant black, referring to the black earth. Every year the Nile would flood, and the country was very much in need of that black earth to keep the soil fertile and have good crops. So Egypt was known as Chem, and these arts became known as chemia by the Greeks. And then later, in the when things moved into the Arab world after the collapse of the Roman Empire, they added the Arabic particle al to it, and it became alchemia.
Wow.
So it finally corrupted into alchemy. So the original dark arts.
So in terms of like, because when you read about sort of Western alchemy tradition, not that I've read huge amounts, but it seems always to go back to Egypt. So is there any kind of really old documentation that you can point to and you can say, yes, they were definitely like they had a really good understanding of metallurgy and they could work with gems, or this is what they were doing? Is there anything that you've come across that really points to something and you think, yes, they were definitely experimenting alchemically at that period? Or is it kind of more the conceptual side of alchemy?
That actually, that was an interesting topic for me. I've always had an interest in Egyptology, and I was very excited to find out that most scholars place the origins of alchemy in ancient Egypt. And so I look around. I'm trying to find out more about that, and all of the texts concerning the history of chemistry, which is really the history of alchemy, at least until the time of Boyle and Newton in the 1600s. They say, yeah, alchemy began in ancient Egypt, and then they jump to Alexandrian alchemists, which is pretty much the end of Egyptian civilization. So I delved into Egyptology for a number of years. In fact, I just published a scroll on Egyptian magic. It's coming out soon. So it's been one of my interests to track alchemy and the ideas of alchemy and the origins of alchemy in ancient Egypt. And you really have to dig for it, but it really is part of the whole tradition of alchemy. It's in there. They talk about the Egyptians were very much into mummification, preserving the body, and that is the one of the three essentials. They also talk about, they recognized subtle aspects of the human economy. So not just a body, we have what they called the ka and the ba. And the ka was sort of what we might call our ki or our prana, our life force.
Yeah.
And the ba you see the little human-headed bird depicting the Ba. That was more everything that made you, you.
Mhm.
Everything that was particular about you, that was your Ba. And so it was really the soul of you, whereas the Ka was more like the life of you, your spirit.
Mm.
And then you have the mummy, which was the body, the salt.
Right. So it's three principles again.
Right. And part of the Egyptian thing was that you could elicit help from the priesthood to, on your death, they would do magical ritual and ceremony to detain your Ka and your Ba from floating up into the netherworld. They would detain them and purify them and reunite them and create what they called the Ach, which was now a glorified being. And the Ach now would gain entrance to the mummy through the opening of the mouth ritual. So
Ah,
now the Ach could come and go between the realms easily. So it's very alchemical. I mean, we have our three essentials, we have the separation, their purification, and their combination. So it's in there, like I say, but you really have to dig for it and understand
mm.
the whole nature of Egyptian philosophy and metaphysics, and really need to know their mythological schemes. It's quite a study.
Mm.
But it is truly the source of Western alchemy.
I come across like, is it Delubitz? He wrote that The Temple of Man and the sort of symbolist interpretation of Egypt. I mean, and not that I'm an expert again, but I've seen a few programs on it. I think there was quite a well-known kind of rogue Egyptologist with John Anthony West did. He got really into that and he produced a couple of books. And I remember reading those and being quite fascinated with it. He was like interpreting images and showing you like two left hands or two right hands, or it was all kind of symbolistic interpretation. The sort of the baboon was like the chattering mind, and it sort of stuck with me as being of interest. So yeah, I mean, again, I don't really know that much about that side of things, but I know Delubis was an alchemist as well, wasn't he? I think he was really into alchemical
Yeah,
principles.
yeah, uh, he was connected with the whole idea about Fulcanelli. Was Fulcanelli a single person, or was he this conclave of several people working? And the idea is that Jelubic was one of the people. In fact, he was probably the brains behind a lot of it. Um, so yeah, he's definitely speaks alchemical language in a lot of his writings.
Mm.
and it's another class we give here. A lot of people I mentioned, the history of alchemy and my interest in Egyptology, and so many people were intrigued, like you, they wanted to know more.
Mm.
So we developed a whole class. So that's another class that we give here on Egyptian magic. So it's the whole history and technology of Egyptian magic.
I
And
don't, you can't not be impressed by it. I mean, we've got obviously the British Museum in London. I quite often spend a bit of time in the Egyptian section. You're just looking at these statues and you're just thinking, how the hell did they do that? I mean, they're so
yeah,
lifelike, they're so amazing. And
yeah,
you're told they're just working with like primitive copper tools, and you think, wow, I mean, that's almost unbelievable. I was
yeah.
going to ask you, just sort of circling around a little bit, a point of interest that I wanted to connect with, and you'd mentioned it earlier on, was this the astrological connection. So, rasa-wise, in the text, they'll mention a lot about the moons, the lunar mansions, and harvesting minerals under certain types of moon and this kind of thing. But the planets themselves, aside from being related to certain gems and certain metals, they're not really invoked so much. It's more like this earlier lunar zodiac. I just wondered, in the Western tradition, how much more influence has astrology and planets got on the system in general? Is it a very interrelated system, or is it kind of an aside?
It's very related, very intimately connected. There are, well, all the herbs, all the metals have their astrological associations, and there are techniques of developing personalized medicines based on your natal chart. And I know they have this also in India, in the Jyotish, the Indian astrology. They can prescribe certain herbal combinations, also gem stones, which they'll have a whole formula for how big stones have to be, you know, that will constitute an amulet for you personally. Same thing in the Western tradition. We can develop personalized medicines based on your own astrological configuration. Tells where you're weak, where you need to strengthen things up, or what your actual strengths are. So a lot of that comes in, and it plays back also to the idea of humoral medicine. Each of the planets have their own humor, and these are the four humors of phlegmatic and choleric, melancholic, and choleric humors. And this was the medical system all through the alchemical golden age, I guess. And it ties back to elements, the elemental theory, which was prominent, you know, East and West. So a lot of the same ideas, technologies, like increases like, and opposites balance, you know.
Same kind of thing, like wearing gemstones as well, like rings and amulets, or do they have would it be actually preparing like elixirs from the stones and then taking them internally, or would it be more external kind of work?
Both. They would begin operations at particular moon phases or planetary correspondences. There's a famous metal called electrum magicum, which was Paracelsus talks about it. It's each of the 7 ancient metals, but fused together during specific conjunctions of the planets.
Oh, wow.
So during a conjunction of, say, Jupiter and Saturn, you would fuse together tin and lead, and then you would wait until maybe the moon came around. It was conjunct both of those, and you would add silver into the fusion. And then you would wait until something, or the moon traveled around, it got conjunction to Venus, and then you'd add copper, and then iron, you know, and you'd end up with this alloy containing all the 7 ancient metals, which had medicinal properties as a ring or an amulet, or even as a bell, had a special frequency or tone that it would give out. So.
Have you prepared that one? Is that something you've done? Have you tried that one?
I have several batches of electrum. Yeah, I've made it several different ways.
And what's the sort of finished quality? Is it sort of silvery, or is it got a sort of like a pinky color?
So it's silvery, very crystalline looking. It's an interesting alloy.
Is it very brittle? Does it sort of break easily? Or
yeah, it'll break very easily.
One of the things I really like about your work, and I know that I've heard this secondhand through people that have studied on your classes and come to your workshops and things, they just say it's just so amazing to watch you work doing all this kind of real practical work where you're almost approaching a problem and solving it as you're looking at it. I remember one of my friends in Germany was saying you made this kind of ad hoc sort of burner, and you were kind of adjusting it as you were doing it. You sort of worked out that it needed to have a spiral flow there in it, and he said you were kind of adjusting it as you were kind of just built it from scratch. You just said whatever you got, I can build it. So I love that kind of like hands-on, super practical approach. I mean, how much of that is just coming through? Are you a bit like that as a person? You just really like to try it and see how it works, or have you got kind of a rough idea? You'll know it will work, but do you know what I mean?
The class that you followed me in Germany, they had dubbed me the MacGyver of alchemy because I was pulling stuff out of random stuff and making equipment we needed that they didn't have. And I've lived in a rural situation. I've lived in the mountains, not very high income for a number of years. And I also had a budget, you know, how much I could devote to alchemy. And so I've had to get by on simple things. And so I've developed what I call guerrilla alchemy. using simple items, and in fact, the Indian alchemy inspired me quite a bit. One of my favorite things is the use of clay smeared cloth. They talk about this in making crucibles. That's another thing. They talk about making crucibles because in the Rasa Shastra, you go through a lot of crucibles. So
That's true.
it's pretty costly to buy crucibles doing it that way. But I got into making my own crucibles very easily, and I can, bounce out a dozen or more crucibles very easily. And I have several different mixes depending on what I want to do, strength-wise or porosity of the crucible, even adding materials into the crucible mix such that they become part of the reaction, so that as the crucibles heat up, certain gases will start infusing my material because they're trapped in the crucible. Or they, conversely, they'll absorb certain toxins out of the materials during the heating. So making crucibles, that was a big one, very cost effective. Another thing was using clay smeared cloth, which they use to seal crucibles together. I use it to build equipment. So I've built several furnaces using tin cans and coating them inside and out with clay smeared cloth. So you see, there's this, I have a double can here. It's actually two juice cans.
Yeah.
And then on the side spout is just a noisemaker from New Year's Eve trumpet. And I cobbled that all together and wrapped it all together with clay smeared cloth inside and out. And this is a model of Rudolf Glauber's philosophical furnace. It's useful for distilling out the acid spirit from materials. It's loaded with live charcoals, and your material is placed in there, and the top is clapped on quickly, and all the fumes go off into this big collection bottle as condense. So I've made several furnaces like that, using clay smeared cloth as my mold. Also, using just chicken wire. So I take chicken wire and I mold that into a shape, and then I wrap it inside and out with the clay smeared cloth, and I've got retorts and other fantastic equipment, very cheaply, very easily.
You're experimenting with horse dung instead of cow dung. I just wondered how you got on with that. Did you find any? Had you done a comparison between the two, or just tried it?
No, it just was convenient. We have horses.
Right.
We have gypsy vanners, and I'm always having to shovel horse manure. So I figured I'd put it to use. So I very often spread it out onto a large canvas and dry it out, and use that in my furnace for demonstrating or doing basma firings. In classes, in our Secunda class, we demonstrate how to make basmas from seashells and bones, things like that. They are sort of an introduction to mineral works because they're minerals that have passed through an organic organism. So we demonstrate how to make basmas as a technique for working with minerals and metals that is very, very efficient. And in a way, Indian alchemists are ahead of the Western because there are basmas being put through clinical testing and trials right now, and they're finding them very effective. Whereas, the East, they're not doing that kind of thing. I don't know of any studies on, say, the oil of gold or oil of antimony, and some of these other powerful medicinals from the Western tradition. And here in the Eastern tradition, they're already leaps and bounds ahead of us in that aspect.
I was just saying, if you go through the Indian formula, if you get the sort of official, it's like the kind of the official Indian Bible of Ayurvedic preparations. It's a standardized form. But if you go through that, it's literally hundreds of recipes in there. I said it's probably 60% or more of the recipes have got at least one alchemical ingredient in them. So it's quite prolific. I mean, even though it's not talked about so much as a, when you talk about Ayurvedic medicine, you don't necessarily mention the Rasa Shastra so much, but it's an integral part of the system and it appears in so many remedies. So it's, it's super popular.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I love the Western technique and I mean Eastern techniques. I use a lot of I borrow a lot from East and West, and put them together, and it makes the whole picture. So yeah, a lot of the basmas and various preparations are very interesting to me, and I think that one of them, Makarajwaj, it's a sort of a sublimated gold. I think it's very similar to the ideas on the Philosopher's Stone, at least one aspect of it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I love the combination of the two, East and West. And I think it really covers the whole picture clearly that
As
way.
I should invest a bit more time in. I mean, the last year or so, I've got sidetracked a little bit. A good friend of mine is a Unani position, so he's kind of reignited my interest in that system. So of course they have like the kushtas, which are the same as the bashmats. It's all the same stuff, but some of the preparations are slightly different. They like concocting things in these kind of sweet, sugary pastes, which of course are very appetizing. So patients actually, chasing after the medicine rather than not wanting to take one. So I kind of got a little bit involved in that, but I would like to circle around at some point and get a little bit more background on the Western stuff. Does really intrigue me. I mean, I was over at a friend's one time again in Germany. He was distilling deer horn and stuff, and it just fascinated me. I mean, that's something you don't see so much or not really at all in the Eastern tradition so much, is the distillation aspect. This kind of, we're distilling liquids rather than working with powders. So that was
Yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we teach that, distilling antlers as a preparation. In fact, I read that compound, ammonium chloride, the salmoniac, is one of a handful of medicines which will strengthen all 15 principles of the dosha. So each dosha has their 5 aspects. And this salmoniac is one of the materials which will strengthen all 15. So we teach how to sublimate salmoniac. It's also used in the Western tradition to make a special solvent which can penetrate deeply into minerals and metals and extract their sulfur and mercury, their oils
Okay.
and spirits out. So you'll see a lot of old alchemical images. They have, you'll see unicorns and deers. They're alluding to the penetrating power of what's in those horns.
Right.
They would sublimate the salmoniac out and create a special solvent which can
Oh, is that
penetrate.
where it's coming from? Is that like, so ammoniac, like Ammon, he had the sort of the horns? Is that
Yeah,
where
yeah.
the right way? Okay, cool.
In Germany, they call it Hirschhorn salts, meaning deer antler salt.
Right.
So, and it's still used in German cooking. So, yeah, it's an interesting substance. We treat that here. So we do teach classes here still. We've moved to an online format with TriStar was, I didn't mention this fancy futuristic looking building that
Yes.
was an artist's conception. That was Father Albertus's idea. His dream was to make the classroom and then have a laboratory producing the materials, and then have a clinic which was actually applying the materials. And so each of those was a star. We have TriStar. And that would perpetuate this whole alchemical legacy. And then Frater Albertus died before that could happen. And then it's very strange that my wife Karen said that, we've taken these classes as far as I can. We got to kick it up a notch, and I don't know how to do that. And then suddenly, we get some students who donate their time and money to create that. And now TriStar has been born, and we've got now an online format, and also still doing the in-person classes here. So TriStar is now actually officially recognized, and we're working to perpetuate the teachings, but also develop a laboratory to produce the materials, and also quite a few people who are interested in using them clinically and evaluating them clinically, because just seeing so many amazing results using the products.
How do people get in contact with you? So you spoke about TriStar. So there's a course. So I mean, what would the course involve? How long would how does it work out? How do you sort of structure that?
They can contact TriStar alchemy.org, and there are online classes. So we do the prima, secunda, tertia, and they're much more drawn out. Tertia, we've stretched it into a year-long program on the mineral and metalworks. Prima, I think, is about 6 months long. Same with secunda. So they're very in-depth. A lot of them are filmed here, during classes, and then we add extra demos and little takes on special techniques. And included with that, there's a live question answer call every other week.
Okay.
So students will gather, online and ask questions. I might give a little talk or presentation on some interesting subject, and then open the floor to questions, everything that we've covered. And so we get some actual one-on-one time doing it that way. We also are still doing the in-person classes. So we have prima, secunda, and tertia, and they are 3-day intensive classes. Each class is about 8 to 10 hours long for the 3 days. We have places where people can camp on site here. We have a 5-acre ranch. And if they prefer, there are hotels that are close by. We live on an Indian reservation, the
Right.
Tulalip Indian reservation. So we're out in the country, and we can do things here that you can't do in the city.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So yeah, we still offer the in-person classes that are very popular, and it's very intense. An hour in the laboratory is worth months of reading over texts and things. So you know how that goes.
Yeah. It's always well, I mean, for me, it's I just like the practical aspect, and I'm more a person that sees it then does it, rather than reading it and try to replicate it. But of course, both are valid methods of learning. In some ways, you need both. But yeah, it's good that you're still doing one-to-one as well. That's great. And
yeah, we opened the online because a lot of people couldn't travel here, so now we can reach people worldwide. People who don't have the facility or funding to travel here for the on-site classes can still take the class and still reap the benefits that way. But yeah, I'm like you. I like to have my hands right in the middle of everything and see it happening and take part in it happening.
okay.
So quite a bit more content in the online stuff than we could cover, in 3 days. So they do both have their merits. The online class has quite a bit of material that we can't cover in 3 days. So that's its plus. The in-person classes has its plus because you can actually see it happening and answer questions directly as they pop into your head, and you take part in it, and you get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference there. Yeah,
I found that with sort of students. I ended up teaching at my old college where I basically studied Ayurveda, and I think after they see what's involved, they don't think so lightly of these medicines anymore. They're so used to sort of buying them off the shelf and just taking it for granted. But once they actually understand the work that's gone into it, they become sort of semi-precious. They realize how much work it is to make those, which is a great thing to sort of instill in people. They are
Yeah,
special. It is special work.
yeah. I love the Eastern methods, but they are very labor intensive. They use simple stuff, but over and
Yeah.
over again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating, but I mean, it's just horses for courses. Everything's different. There are some that are very quick and we can do not too bad. Others are very labor intensive, but depends on the material. So basically, the online course, you've got your 4 books, which I have the Way of the Crucible and the Real Alchemy book. I haven't got the other 2, so I'll explore those. And you were showing me last time you've got a whole load of like workshop books or your notes that you've been keeping over the years. You're going to sort of eventually produce those as a sort of reproduction of your notebook kind of thing, isn't it?
yeah. I have about 20 large 3-ring binders that are full of experiments and laboratory instrumental data. You can see some of the types of information I collect. I've got like infrared scans, and I have a scan of gold oil from gas chromatography. You can see that it's very complex. And these oils from metals are just as complex as oils that you would derive from plants, essential oils. So they're not simple compounds. They're very complex materials that have amazing properties. And I've seen miraculous effects from using them over the years. People, near death, popping out of it, and tumors dissolving, and doctors saying, "Where'd the tumor go? It was right here,"
Wow.
and they can't find it anymore. And when I had first met my wife, Karen, she had horses, and one of the horses got stung in the face and had an allergic reaction, and it was swollen up like a melon and oozing this nasty looking pus. And she had the vet out there, gave her shots and gave her an ointment and things to put in her feed. And after 3 days, there was no difference. In fact, it looked worse. And she was quite worried about it. And she asked, is there anything I could think of to put on there? Because she knew I was interested in alchemy. She just didn't know to what extent yet. So I went in, I dug around in a box, and I pulled out a tincture from antimony, and I said, "Here, put some of this on there." And by later the afternoon, the swelling had visibly reduced. She put on another dose and put the horses to bed. Next day, it was totally gone.
Wow.
And healing over. The pussy thing had sealed up and had stopped, and she freaked out. She said, "Who else knows about this? How to do this?" And I said, "Not very many people." And she said, "Well, we got to change that. This can't die with you." So she's been on her mission was to make sure that the teachings don't die out. And so over the past 20 years, she's been, guiding the classes, developing the school here, and now we've switch gears into TriStar. And so now we can be assured that the teachings will be perpetuated.
And I think it is generally increasing, isn't it? I get more and more interest all the time. I mean, I think that people are genuinely looking for something out there. We've reached a point now where perhaps a lot of these chronic conditions have reached a point where they're not actually curable anymore. People are just kind of lingering on, and it's just sort of like palliative care, isn't it? They're not actually getting to the root of the problem. So if people are beginning to look around, and like you say, these systems have been around a long, long time. They've been treating lots of different complaints, and maybe it's time for them to come back. Maybe you've just been born at this time to make sure that it gets rebirthed and people get access to it.
Yeah. I don't know how it is in the UK. I know here, they have so many commercials on the television about, this medicine and that medicine, the new wonder drug. And then that's followed by, the lawsuit against the drug they were talking about last week, class action, that drug. I think people have lost faith in medical system, plus the costs are outrageous. So yeah, they're looking for alternatives, and this is a very powerful alternative that people are becoming aware of. So it is becoming very popular.
Well, let's bring it to a close. I mean, thank you very much for coming on and talking today. It's been really great. I waited a long time to speak to you, so it was great to finally sit down and have a conversation with you. I really enjoyed it. And I hope people contact you. I'll put up all your details at the end. Contact Robert, get his books, get involved in what he's doing. There are lots of, I think there's videos, you've got like introductory videos free online where you can see at least you're kind of introducing the subject. So I encourage people to watch those and yeah, visit the website and look up Robert and his work. And yeah, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was very great. Yeah, I'm so pleased to finally meet you in person.